Zorak had always taken pride in his work. As an explorer for the Galactic Council, his missions were considered vital, prestigious. He had charted paths through the most treacherous sectors of the galaxy, explored systems no one else dared approach, and discovered planets that would one day serve as new homes for countless species. His expertise had brought him accolades from the highest ranks of the Interstellar Alliance. His name was spoken with reverence. Now, he floated alone in the void. The mission was supposed to be another triumph, chart the uncharted region of the Calthorian expanse, a dangerous area of space riddled with anomalies and unpredictable stellar phenomena. Many called it a fool's errand, but Zorak had accepted it without hesitation. He trusted his experience. He trusted his ship. He hadn't expected the storm. A massive, cosmic surge of energy, unlike anything he'd seen, had swept through the region, rendering his ship almost inoperable in a matter of minutes. The propulsion systems were fried, the communication arrays damaged, and the shielding was barely holding. He managed to stabilize his life support systems, but beyond that, he was stranded in the middle of a desolate, lifeless system. It was a void in every sense. Zorak's claws tapped against the controls, his movements steady, methodical. There was no room for panic. He scanned his ship's resources again. Oxygen levels were stable for now, but without propulsion or long-range communication, the situation was dire. His eyes narrowed as he initiated a distress signal to the Galactic Council. They would send help. They had to. Hours passed. Then days. His requests for aid went unanswered, the silence from the Council deafening. He adjusted the transmission frequency, sent another wave of messages, encrypted them with his highest security clearance. Surely, they were busy, perhaps organizing a rescue. There had to be a reason for the delay. The Galactic Council would never leave him behind. He was one of their most trusted explorers, one who had devoted his life to their cause. He had ventured into the unknown countless times, always emerging victorious, always expanding the reach of the Council. But the days continued to drag on, and the emptiness around him deepened. Then the message came. Short, curt, efficient, just like the Council. Zorak, your situation has been deemed too high risk. The cost of a rescue mission exceeds projected benefits. You are ordered to await further instruction. Council out. The words hung in the stale air of his cabin. Too high risk. The cost of a rescue mission exceeded the benefits. He couldn't believe it. They had abandoned him. Him. Zorak, the one who had faced countless dangers for them, the one who had mapped uncharted space to fuel their expansion. And now, in his time of need, they had calculated his worth and found him lacking. His claws clenched against the control panel. It wasn't anger that consumed him, though he wished it were. Anger would have been easier to manage. No, what overwhelmed him now was disbelief, a hollow, sinking sense of betrayal. The Council, for whom he had risked everything, had deemed him expendable. A resource too costly to save. He sat in the dim light of his ship's cockpit, staring at the stars outside. He had always known the Council operated on cold logic, driven by equations of efficiency and practicality. But he had never thought that same pragmatism would be turned on him. Not after all he had given. He sent one last transmission. It wasn't to the Council, not anymore. He knew they wouldn't hear him, or worse, that they would choose not to listen. No, this message was sent out to the universe itself. A desperate cry, scattered into the cosmos, a plea from a dying explorer left behind. This is Zorak of the Galactic Council Exploration Fleet. My ship has suffered critical damage. Coordinates attached. To anyone who can hear this, my life support is failing. Please, I need help. He knew the odds of anyone intercepting the signal were slim. He was far beyond any standard travel routes, in a region most ships avoided due to its reputation for danger. He wasn't even sure if the signal would make it past the interference from the cosmic storm. Zorak leaned back in his seat, his strength fading as he stared into the endless void of space. He had always known the risks of exploration, had prepared himself for the possibility that one day a mission might go wrong. But he had never imagined it would end like this, Not abandoned, not discarded by those he had served. The emptiness of space pressed in on him, and for the first time in his life, Zorik felt truly alone. His claws relaxed, his body sinking into the chair. All he could do now was wait. For rescue. Or for death. The Iron Heart wasn't the sleekest ship in the galaxy. It wasn't the fastest either, or the most advanced. But it was reliable, and for Captain Sarah and her crew, that was enough. Sarah had spent years in the rough corners of space, running salvage missions in places most other ships wouldn't venture. She was tough, practical, and fiercely loyal to the people she called family, her crew. Alex, the engineer, was tinkering with some damaged equipment in the engine room when the faint blip of a distress signal lit up on the main console. He wiped the sweat from his brow, sighed, and called over the intercom. "Captain, you might want to see this." Sarah joined him, her face set in that familiar, no-nonsense expression she wore whenever something unexpected happened. Mark, the pilot, leaned in too, his curiosity piqued. The signal was weak, distorted by distance and interference, but there was no mistaking it. It was a distress call. "Origin?" Sarah asked, already flipping through the data on the screen. "Alien. No idea which species," Alex replied. "Could be anyone." Mark whistled low. "Think we should check it out? Could be trouble." Sarah didn't respond immediately. She was thinking. Space was full of risks, and more often than not, responding to distress signals meant walking into a situation that could go from bad to worse in seconds. But that was the job. The Galactic Council didn't concern itself with the fringes of space. Humans had learned to fend for themselves out here. "We don't know who's out there," Mark continued. "And we sure as hell don't know what kind of mess they're in. Could be a trap, for all we know." "It's not about the reward," Sarah said quietly. "It's about doing the right thing. Someone's out there, and they're in trouble. We can't just leave them." Mark and Alex exchanged glances. This was typical Sarah. Even in a universe that often felt cold and uncaring, Sarah had a moral compass that never wavered. Alex shrugged. "I'm with the captain. Besides, what's the point of having all this junk we salvage if we can't help someone with it?" Mark laughed, shaking his head. Yeah, I know. All right, let's do this." With that, Sarah set the course. The Iron Heart wasn't much, but it had gotten them out of tight spots before, and they trusted it. As the ship altered its trajectory, Sarah stared at the fading stars outside the cockpit window, her mind already running through possible scenarios. The Galactic Council had its rules, and those rules often dictated that certain lives weren't worth the risk. But Sarah didn't believe in that kind of logic. Alex was already at work scanning the signal, trying to get more details. "It's faint," he said after a moment. "Barely holding together. Whoever's out there, they've been stranded for a while." Mark leaned back in his chair, watching the data scroll across the screen. "We've got no idea what kind of ship it is, right?" "Not yet," Alex replied. "Could be anything from a luxury cruiser to a warship. I'm working on it. Could be dangerous," Mark said, but there was no real hesitation in his voice. He knew what they were getting into. "Everything's dangerous out here," Sarah said. "That's never stopped us before." Hours passed as they moved closer to the source of the distress call. Sarah kept her eyes on the scanners, watching for any signs of hostile ships or other potential dangers. It was a calculated risk, they all knew that. The galaxy was full of dangers, from space pirates to unstable political alliances. But none of that mattered now. There was a life at stake. Finally, Alex managed to clean up the signal enough to get a clearer read. "Looks like the ship's not too far off. It's in pretty bad shape, though. We're talking full systems failure." Sarah leaned forward. "Can you identify it yet?" Alex frowned, typing rapidly on the console. "I've got a match. Alien-class ship, most likely one of the Galactic Council's exploration vessels." "Damn, that's rare. These ships don't usually end up in places like this." "So what's it doing out here?" Mark asked. "No idea," Alex replied. But it's definitely in distress. Life support is barely hanging on, propulsion is down, and communications shot. Whoever's on board, they're not getting out of this without help. Mark whistled again, longer this time. Council ship. That complicates things. You know how the Council feels about humans getting involved in their affairs. They don't care about us, and we don't answer to them, Sarah said. This isn't about politics. It's about saving someone who needs it. The silence that followed wasn't one of disagreement. They'd all been in situations before where the right thing to do didn't align with the safest thing to do. And yet, they'd never once regretted their choices. We're heading in, Sarah said firmly. Get the systems ready. This is gonna be rough. As the Iron Heart approached the coordinates, the crews settled into their roles. Mark adjusted the ship's trajectory, keeping them just outside the worst of the debris field. Alex prepped the salvage gear, ready to patch up whatever they could once they made contact. There was no guarantee of reward, no assurance that this would end well. But that wasn't why they were doing it. Sarah glanced at the screen again, the coordinates flickering faintly. Whoever was out there had probably been waiting a long time, hoping someone, anyone, would come. Well, they were coming. The Iron Heart slipped into the desolate sector where Zorik's ship floated lifelessly, a speck of metal against the endless void. The alien vessel was in far worse shape than the crew had expected. Entire sections were scorched black from the cosmic storm, debris floated aimlessly around it, and the ship itself barely registered as operational on the scanners. Captain Sarah leaned forward, her gaze hardening as she surveyed the scene. Alex, get ready. We don't have much time. Alex had already begun scanning the alien ship's systems. Life support's critical. He's got maybe hours left before it completely fails. Then we move now, Sarah said, standing up. Mark, keep us steady. I'll board with Alex. The decision was made quickly, without hesitation. That's how they worked, fast, efficient, without second-guessing each other. They knew the stakes. Inside Zorik's ship, the situation was even more dire than the readings suggested. The life support systems were practically non-existent, the air thick and stale. Zorik himself lay slumped in his chair, his body weak from the lack of oxygen. His eyes fluttered open when the airlock door slid open with a hiss. Humans. He hadn't expected this. Of all the species in the galaxy, it was these primitive creatures that had come for him. His mind struggled to process what he was seeing. For so long, humanity had been regarded as little more than an oddity, technologically behind, barely making an impact on the galactic stage. Yet here they were, standing in his ship, risking their lives in a place no one else dared approach. Sarah and Alex entered the room, moving quickly toward the control panel. The universal translator kicked in, allowing Zorik to understand their voices, though he was still too weak to respond. Life support's failing. We need to get him out of here fast, Alex said, his hands already working to stabilize the system. Sarah knelt next to Zorik, her eyes meeting his. There was no fear, no hesitation, just determination. We're getting you out of here, she said calmly, even though he could see the weight of the situation in her expression. She didn't treat him like a stranded alien or some calculated risk, just a person in need of help. Zorik tried to speak, but his voice was a faint rasp. The translator picked up his thoughts, barely audible. Why, humans? Sarah smiled faintly as she worked to check his vitals. Because we're here. That's all that matters. Zorik didn't have the strength to argue, but confusion swirled in his mind. The Galactic Council had abandoned him without a second thought. His entire life's work had been discarded because saving him wasn't deemed worth the cost. But these humans, with their outdated ship and their reputation for reckless decisions, had come. No reward, no strategic benefit, just pure, unfiltered empathy. The humans moved quickly. Alex managed to get enough of the life support back online to stabilize the air, but it was a temporary fix. The ship's core systems were fried, and there was no way they'd be able to get it running again without serious repairs. We'll need to tow the ship, Alex said as he worked. But the damage, it's bad. We'll figure it out, Sarah replied, her focus still on Zorik. Let's just get him stable. The ship groaned around them, metal creaking under the strain of its damaged frame. Time was running out, and everyone knew it. But the humans didn't give up. Alex continued patching up what he could, while Sarah focused on getting Zorik into a more secure area. Zorik watched them in silence, his mind reeling. These humans didn't operate with the cold efficiency of the Galactic Council. There was no calculation of cost or risk, no weighing the odds of whether his life was worth saving. They simply worked together, each trusting the other to do their part. Their teamwork was seamless, born not out of some rigid hierarchy but from an innate sense of loyalty and camaraderie. As they moved him to the Iron Heart, Zorik could feel his body starting to recover. The humans weren't advanced by galactic standards, but they were resourceful. Their ship was patched together from salvaged parts, a hodgepodge of technologies, but it worked. And that was what mattered. We'll get you to a safe place, Sarah assured him as they secured him in a med bay. You're going to be all right. Zorik studied her, still trying to comprehend the motivation behind her actions. You don't know me. Why risk this? Sarah paused for a moment, her eyes meeting his. Because no one deserves to be left behind. Those words struck Zorik deeply. No one deserves to be left behind. It was so different from the Galactic Council's cold pragmatism. In their world, everything was calculated, lives weighed against resources, missions abandoned if they became too costly. Yet here were these humans, risking everything simply because it was the right thing to do. As the Iron Heart maneuvered around the wreckage of Zorik's ship, the crew faced obstacle after obstacle. The ship's systems were barely holding together, the debris from the cosmic storm made navigation treacherous, and resources were running low. But not once did they falter. Alex worked tirelessly to stabilize the systems, patching up the hull with whatever scrap he could find. Mark piloted the ship with expert precision, guiding them through the chaos. Zorik watched it all unfold, his admiration for these humans growing with every passing moment. They weren't just surviving, they were thriving in the face of overwhelming odds. Their resilience, their ingenuity, their refusal to back down even when things seemed impossible, it was unlike anything he'd ever seen. As the humans pulled away from the wreckage, towing his damaged ship behind them, Zorik realized something profound. These creatures, dismissed by the Galactic Council as insignificant, had something the rest of the galaxy had overlooked. It wasn't just their technology or their resourcefulness, it was their spirit. They didn't follow the same cold logic that ruled the rest of the galaxy. They cared for each other, and for strangers like him, in a way that defied reason. And in that moment, Zorik felt something he hadn't felt in a long time: hope. The Iron Heart drifted in the dark silence of space, the crew working tirelessly to complete the final repairs on Zorik's ship. Despite the damage, they had managed to stabilize most systems. Zorik, still weak but recovering, watched them in quiet amazement. Every move they made was precise, every decision based on instinct and trust in one another. Their teamwork was unlike anything he'd ever seen. Suddenly, a piercing alarm shattered the calm. Mark, sitting at the console, cursed under his breath. We've got company. On the main screen, a galactic patrol ship blinked into view, its sleek, menacing form cutting through the stars. The patrol ship was heavily armed, and its arrival was no accident. Sarah's eyes narrowed. They're not here for a friendly chat. They've got orders to stop us, Zorik said grimly. He knew how the Galactic Council operated. If they had deemed him a lost cause, the patrol's orders would be clear: ensure no one wasted further resources on his rescue. And if the humans refused? Well, the Council wasn't known for leniency. A message crackled over the comms. This is Galactic Patrol. You are harboring an individual deemed non-essential by the Council. Stand down and leave the area immediately, or face consequences. Sarah's jaw tightened. So much for a rescue mission without drama. Alex muttered, still working on Zorik's ship. We're not exactly in shape for a fight. The voice from the patrol ship returned, more forceful now. You have been warned. Abandon the alien and withdraw, or we will take action. Zorik, seated weakly beside the crew, shook his head. You can't win. They'll destroy you if you resist. But Sarah didn't flinch. We didn't come all this way to leave you behind. Let them come. We'll figure this out. It was a defiant stance, and Zorik was stunned. They were up against a force far greater than their modest salvage ship could handle, yet these humans stood their ground, unwilling to sacrifice him. The same species that the Galactic Council considered expendable, reckless, and primitive, was proving to be anything but. Brace yourselves, Mark said, his fingers flying over the controls. They're powering up weapons. Without hesitation, the patrol ship fired a warning shot, narrowly missing the Iron Heart. The force of the blast rocked the ship, but the crew remained calm. They'd been in tight spots before, but this was on another level. Get the engines up, Sarah ordered. We're not sticking around for round 2. Mark threw the ship into gear, the Iron Heart roaring to life as it shot forward. The patrol ship followed, its weapons systems locking onto them. We can't outrun them, Mark said through gritted teeth, steering the ship through the debris field. Not for long, anyway. We don't have to outrun them, Sarah replied. We just need to buy some time. Zorik, despite his weakened state, leaned forward, his eyes scanning the star map. He knew this region of space better than most. There's a nebula up ahead, dense enough to scramble their sensors if we can get in close. Mark's eyes widened. That's a death trap. We'll lose navigation in there. Maybe, Zorik said, but it's your best chance. I'll guide you. Sarah nodded. Do it. As the Iron Heart streaked toward the nebula, the patrol ship opened fire. The shots came fast and precise, but Mark weaved through the asteroid field, using the debris as cover. The ship groaned under the strain, and sparks flew from one of the control panels as a near hit sent them spiraling. Shields are down to 30%, Alex shouted. We can't take much more of this. Zorik's fingers moved swiftly over the controls, directing them toward the thickest part of the nebula. Once we're inside, they won't be able to track us as easily. But it's going to be tight. Sarah tightened her grip on the armrest. We've handled worse. The patrol ship closed in, its cannons glowing as it prepared to fire another volley. Mark pushed the Iron Heart to its limits, the engines screaming as they raced toward the edge of the nebula. The stars outside blurred as they plunged into the swirling clouds of ionized gas. Inside the nebula, everything went dark. The ship's sensors flickered, struggling to cut through the interference. We're flying blind in here, Mark muttered. I hope you know what you're doing. Zorik's voice was calm, steady. Trust me. Just follow my directions. The patrol ship fired blindly into the nebula, but the humans had already disappeared into the thick, disorienting clouds. The Iron Heart navigated by instinct and Zorik's knowledge of the region, dodging pockets of unstable energy and magnetic storms that would have torn a lesser ship apart. For what felt like hours, they flew in silence, the only sound the hum of the engines and the faint crackle of interference. The tension in the air was palpable, but the crew remained focused. There was no room for fear or doubt now. Finally, Zorik spoke. We're clear. The patrol won't be able to follow us in here without risking their own systems. Mark let out a breath he hadn't realized he was holding. That was too close. Sarah leaned back in her seat, her expression unreadable. We're not out of the woods yet, but we've bought ourselves some time. Zorik sat back, his body still weak but his mind racing. These humans had just risked everything, defied the council, faced down a patrol ship, and flown through a nebula that should have killed them. And all for him. He had seen bravery before, but nothing like this. Nothing like the sheer will and determination these humans possessed. I don't understand, Zorik said quietly, his voice filled with awe. Why do this? You could have left me. No one would have blamed you. Sarah met his gaze, her eyes softening just slightly. That's not who we are. We don't abandon people, no matter what the council says. Zorik looked at each of them in turn, Mark, who had piloted them through impossible odds, Alex, who had patched up the systems when they should have failed, and Sarah, who had refused to leave him behind. They were nothing like the cold, calculating species he had worked with for so long. They were driven by something far deeper, something that couldn't be quantified or measured. And in that moment, Zorik knew that humanity was far more than the galaxy gave them credit for. They were not primitive. They were not reckless. They were something far greater, brave, loyal, and willing to stand up for what was right, even when the odds were against them. Zorik felt a surge of respect and gratitude, stronger than anything he'd ever felt before. "I owe you my life." Sarah smiled faintly. "We're not done yet. Let's get you home." Zorik leaned back in his seat, staring at the console in front of him, but his mind was far away. The Iron Heart and his own ship had found temporary refuge in a quiet, uninhabited system far from the patrol's reach. The nebula they'd used to escape had hidden them well, and now, for the first time since this ordeal began, he could breathe without the weight of immediate danger. The humans, meanwhile, were busy checking their ship's systems and replenishing what little supplies they could scavenge from the surrounding space debris. Their resilience was remarkable. After everything they had been through, they simply carried on, always moving forward. It was a trait Zorik had seen in other species, but never with such intensity, such unyielding determination. For the first time in a long while, Zorik felt something other than the cold calculation that had governed his decisions as an explorer for so many years. It wasn't just gratitude. It was something deeper, a humility, a recognition of something far beyond what the Galactic Council understood. These humans, whom the galaxy dismissed as irrelevant and primitive, had risked their lives for him, without any thought of reward or gain. Mark, Alex, and Sarah were gathered around the control console, going over a map of nearby systems. Sarah caught Zorik's gaze and walked over, her expression soft but curious. "How are you holding up?" she asked. Zorik hesitated for a moment. "I've traveled the stars for decades, seen things many in the galaxy only dream of," he said, his voice quieter than usual. "Yet I've never felt this lost." Sarah tilted her head slightly, waiting for him to continue. "I've followed orders my entire life. I've served the Council faithfully, believing in their decisions, in the structure of the galaxy. But now—" His words trailed off, unsure how to convey the deep shift that had taken place inside him. "Now, everything feels different." Sarah nodded. "I think we've all been there, in one way or another." Zorik turned his gaze to the crew working around the ship. "The galaxy doesn't see you. It doesn't understand your strength. I didn't understand it either, not until now. You're not the first to underestimate us," Sarah said with a small smile. "But we're used to proving people wrong." Zorik's chest tightened as he thought back to the Council, to their cold indifference as they left him to die. And then there were the humans, who had been willing to throw everything aside, even in the face of the Galactic Patrol, to save him. He had been taught that humans were reckless, impulsive, and inconsequential in the grand scheme of things. But they were so much more than that. "I was wrong about you," Zorik said softly, the weight of those words pressing on him. "About all of you." Sarah shrugged, the humility of her people showing through. "You're not the first, and you won't be the last." "I want to do more than just thank you," Zorik said, his tone firming. "I have connections, resources within the Council. I can help you. Maybe even open doors for humanity that have been closed for too long." Sarah raised an eyebrow. "That's generous, but won't that put a target on your back? The Council isn't exactly the forgiving type." "I'm already marked," Zorik replied. "My rescue, your defiance, won't go unnoticed. But if we do this together, if we stand as one, maybe we can start changing things. Not just for you, but for the galaxy. The Council has grown too cold, too disconnected from the beings it's meant to protect. Your actions today prove there's another way." He could see the skepticism in Sarah's eyes, but there was a glimmer of hope, too. "It's not going to be easy," she said, her voice steady. "The galaxy's a big place, and most species don't look too kindly on us." "I know," Zorik said. "But I've seen enough to know that if anyone can change that, it's you." There was a long pause before Sarah spoke again. We'll think about it. For now, let's just focus on getting out of here in one piece. Zorik nodded. It was a reasonable answer. After all, these humans had already risked more than anyone could have asked of them. But deep inside, he knew that this was just the beginning. Their alliance, born of loyalty, defiance, and something far more profound, had the potential to change the course of the galaxy itself. Later, as the humans worked on the final repairs and set their course for the next leg of their journey, Zorik sat alone in his quarters, recording a personal log. Today, I witnessed something I never thought possible. Humans, creatures the Galactic Council sees as primitive and inconsequential, showed me a strength that defies explanation. They rescued me not for reward or recognition, but because, in their words, it was the right thing to do. I have served the Council faithfully for years, believing in their wisdom, trusting their decisions. But today, I understand that they have lost something vital, a connection to the beings they are supposed to protect. These humans, with their courage and empathy, represent something the galaxy has forgotten: the power of loyalty, of unity, of standing up for what's right, no matter the cost. I owe them my life, but more than that, I owe them the truth. Humanity is not primitive. They are not reckless. They are brave, loyal, and capable of far more than we give them credit for. If the galaxy is to have any hope of a better future, it must learn from these humans. I will not forget what they have done. And I will ensure that others in the galaxy know of their actions, their courage, and their potential. Zorik paused, looking out at the stars beyond his viewport, a new determination burning in his chest. Perhaps, in the end, it is not humanity that needs saving. Perhaps it is the rest of us who need them. With that, Zorik ended the log. The future was uncertain, but for the first time in a long while, he felt hopeful. Together, with his new allies, there was no telling what they might achieve.